Welcome to Speaking of Men. You're watching public access television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'm your host, Mike Rivas. Our guest today is David Nuckols. He's an investigator with the District Attorney's Office here in Albuquerque. David is a part of the Family Crimes Division, and our topic is custodial interference. Welcome to the Speaking of Men, Dave.
Glad to be here.
David, can you give us a little background on how you became involved in the Family Crimes Division, and give us a little bit of a definition or a sense of what family crime is?
Well, the Family Crimes Unit was started here in the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office about 3.5 years ago. There had been a need for this division for some time. Both Steve Schiff and then, of course, Bob Schwartz saw that need, and Bob Schwartz is the one that finally got the unit going. As far as the type of crimes that it deals with, essentially four types. The family crimes would come under elderly abuse, child abuse, that would include all types of child abuse, custodial interference, and we also deal, of course, with domestic violence. So essentially those four major types of crimes. Probably the biggest thing that we deal with is the child abuse, though the domestic violence, there's a great deal of that. And the residential, what we call residential abuse or elderly abuse, is something that's new. The statute is new, a year old or so, maybe a little more, but that is tend to be on an increase.
How are we statistically against the rest of the nation for things like child abuse, domestic violence?
Well, I don't know what it would be exactly. I think we're probably on a par with the rest of the country. Child abuse is, as you probably know, is something that's been on the increase, or at least it's being reported more often in the last, say, 5-10 years. And unfortunately, there's what we consider far too much. I think, as you may have noticed in some of the newspapers, that mentioned that Department of Human Services is getting more referrals as far as child abuse than it ever has before. Of course, they're greatly undermanned, as we are, but it's on the rise. It's on the rise, or at least, again, it's being reported more often than it has been in the past.
And people are just beginning to be aware that elderly people are neglected and abused.
Yes, and that's something I'm sure that's been going on for years. And the Department of Human Services has an excellent Adult Protective Services, is what it's called. They deal with the actual investigation of the abuse, mostly dealing with different centers or agencies that house the elderly, of which are quite a few in Albuquerque. And they do an excellent job investigating these cases. They refer them to our office. We look at them as far as whether we're going to prosecute those cases. And but that's something that, of course, is on the rise. We're new at it. We're just dealing with it now. But you find that those type of crimes are very similar to child abuse crimes.
Somebody made the comment that a lot of child abuse is tied into drug and alcohol abuse as well. Is that right? Or?
There's you see that correlation. The drug abuse, the alcohol. A lot of times that will come into neglect or just straight out physical or sexual abuse. And it's very common to find drug and alcohol abuse in that scenario.
Yes.
I mean, you see it there.
Right.
It's there.
Seems like booze and drugs do a job on everybody.
They do. They do. And unfortunately, we of course we have 7 attorneys in the office. Only 1 investigator, unfortunately, myself. But we're undermanned there. There's more cases than we can really handle and handle well. But it's the same problem you find throughout this type of law enforcement or government. Not enough money, or at least not enough money forwarded to us. We would like to do a better job than we can, but we're not given enough money from the legislature. Like our complaint is the same as a lot of people's.
In 1989, the state legislature addressed what's commonly known as custodial interference. Let's talk about the reasons for that.
Well, the statute that we had at the time, about 4 lines long, it really wasn't worth the paper it was written on. It essentially said that a parent or one having custody who left the state, they had to leave the state, and they had to know that they couldn't leave the state, which means they had to have had a court order, would then be, and of course the child was, I think they defined it as 1 under 16 years of age. So they had to leave the state, they had to know they couldn't leave the state, in other words, there had to be a court order, would be, this was defined as custodial interference. The problem is in the state of New Mexico, most people don't have a court order, and a lot of them don't leave the state, but still commit, so to speak, commit this crime. So we knew in the office there was a need for a new statute, and we began to address the problem in 1988 or so, began to look for different statutes throughout the country that were good. Found that the one in California was probably the best. Adapted California usually ahead of the nation most of the time in these kind of things. And so we took that statute, adapted it to New Mexico's needs. This one that we have now is considerably longer, about a page worth. It addresses many of the aspects of custodial interference and is really quite good. Needs a little work maybe, but that's what court challenges and case law and so on, when they develop, that's what that's all about.
You know, one of the interesting things for me was in talking with you a little bit before the program today is I think it would help our viewers to understand that you're part of the criminal division. There's a difference between the criminal and the civil.
That's correct.
And could you talk about the differences between those
Sure, and how
two
the statute affects that, it's a good point. I mean, obviously the district attorney's office prosecutes people for criminal misconduct, and the way this works, this is the first time I think probably that we deal as much with the civil courts as we do. Obviously, a lot of our cases come out of dealing with custodial interference, come out of the civil court. There's maybe a custody battle going on. You know, they're going through a divorce proceeding, whatever. And so what we looked at, what we wanted the statute to do was essentially to force people into the courts that ordinarily weren't there. Probably most of the cases we got, these people they don't have a court order, they don't have attorneys, they're just fussing and fighting over the kids. Essentially what they're doing is they're fussing and fighting with each other, and the kids get involved in the middle. And as we talked about, we look at custodial interference as child abuse. We can discuss that maybe a little later. But the idea is that we're there, the statute is there to essentially, as in a manner of speaking, maybe a threat. You all, you know, straighten up, behave, get before the domestic court, get this worked out, and we will not need to be involved. If they don't, and particularly if one takes the child and leaves the state or just denies custody to the other person, criminal charges could result. And that's something that people don't really want to fool with.
So the time it gets to you, it's pretty out of control. I mean, it sounds like the system gives everybody there a chance to be an adult and work the problems out.
Usually is. Most people don't realize, a lot of the calls we get, you know, the such and such parent took off with my child. I haven't seen the child for 2 or 3 weeks, or maybe it's a month, or maybe they know they went out of state. So they call us, and we're essentially the front line. I mean, everybody knows that if there's a problem, you call the DA's office first. It goes across my desk first, and we try to deal with it. We make a phone call or two if we know where they are. We send them a letter if we can't reach them by phone, and let them know that this is a violation or a possible violation of state law. And that usually gets their attention very quickly. And in most cases, probably 98% of the cases, they come back and they go before the court, or they work something out. They don't necessarily have to go before the court, but they need to work it out.
You know, not to depart too much from the direction that you and I are trying to take, as an aside, on the civil level, there's been a real attempt on the part of the courts to create some sense of mediation and take a lot of that hysteria. Do you feel that's being successful at all? Or?
I've heard that there's been some good success with that. Certainly, you know, we encourage these people to go through something like that, whether or not they get an attorney and go before the domestic court, or maybe just go to the court clinic to work something. Usually, of course, you have to go through the court before you go to the court clinic, but or go to mediation, or just sit down and work it out. That's what we're looking for. They need to quit acting like children, so to speak, though maybe that's an insult to the children at times, but work it out, act like adults, and get together and work something out here, if not for their benefit, for the benefit of the child.
That's one of our real focuses on speaking of men, is the fact that children are often used as weapons or pawns, which is really damaging to the child in the long run. It's really to the parents' benefit to work that stuff out so that the child does not suffer, you know, in those kinds of really emotionally violent situations. From reading the prep sheet on this, I got the impression that the Journal did a little article and interview with you.
They did here a couple of months ago.
A couple of months back. And our producer was amazed at the fact that you made the statement that mothers are the ones that kidnap children more often than fathers. Is that generally true?
That's been my experience. And I think there's probably several reasons that happens. Let's put it this way: I haven't kept any statistics exactly whether it's who's is doing this. I mean, I've got the statistics as far as names. A lot of these cases are difficult to go back and resurrect them as to who took the child. But I speak to more men who are calling about I can't see my child for whatever reason. My ex-wife or my ex-girlfriend or whatever is wrong with the child. I think there's reasons why that happens. Not all of them look good as far as the men's side of this, and realize, of course, we're not taking sides one way or the other.
Sure.
We don't. That's not important to us. The idea is that there's a possible crime that's been committed. But I think where a lot of that comes from is the different reasons. One, I think that, or at least the experience we have, is more men are working than women are, and usually maybe it's because the women have the children. In most cases, that may be court ordered, or that's just the way things have worked out. Again, most of the people we deal with have never been before the court, and so the women are more free in that respect to leave if necessary. But one of the reasons, I mean, in other words, the man won't leave because he's got a job, he's working, and also I think the woman at times feels she has less options, less money, therefore less options, and so when push comes to shove, she takes the child and goes. Also, as statistics will tell you, and again, I don't have these, but those are known well throughout the country, as far as domestic violence is concerned, or child abuse is concerned, more often than not, it is the man that's usually the one that's committing that crime. Now, those statistics will prove that out. Of course, we're not saying that always is the case. Not at all. Women do abuse children. Women certainly cause domestic violence at times. But therefore, the woman, she feels like her route of escape is to take the child and go. And so I think that my experience has certainly been that more women commit custodial interference than men.
Than men do. But some of it probably just economic and.
I think a great part of it is economic. Reasons, of course, now there's an excuse that's used often. Well, he's not paying child support. That's not an excuse in New Mexico. That's not a defense. The fact that the father may not be paying child support, if it's the father that's been ordered to pay child support, has nothing to do as to whether or not he can see his child. That's not something that's done in New Mexico. If he doesn't pay child support, there's avenues to handle that. But the father still sees the child.
I know I've run into a few men who were just absolutely rabid over the fact that they weren't deadbeat dads and that they were paying child support and that nobody in the court system seems to hear them. Don Chavez of the Interstate Child Support Commission was on earlier this year or the end of last, and he was saying that one state now has, and investigators like you, where when the child support is not paid, someone goes out, but when visitation is withheld, someone goes out immediately as well. And I think that would probably be something that would serve New Mexico real well. It would sure take a lot of that blame and just rabid hatred and frustration and served again to take the child out of the middle. Well, I'm trying to get a little bit of a sense of where we might go from here. I'm wondering, let's say that a parent was having a problem. What would be one of the first steps they would take? How should a parent react? The husband or the wife didn't bring the child back from a visit, or child support's being withheld, or whatever it might be. What would be the first thing they would do?
Well, obviously, if child support's being withheld, they go to the Child Support Enforcement Bureau, and I realize that there's a long line there and a long wait, but we don't handle the child support by law. We don't have a statute that specifically deals with that. As far as the custodial interference, though, we can respond to that rather quickly and do. Again, we don't look at these cases where, she was 15 minutes late and bringing the child to me, or an hour late or whatever. Those are things that we just can't get involved in. What we're looking at is more long-term violation of custody. Most of the calls I get, I haven't seen my child in a month. I'm supposed to see the child every week, or once a week, once every 2 weeks. I haven't seen him in a month, 2 months. Sometimes I get a call, I haven't seen my child in a year and a half, And of course, one of the first questions is, well, where have you been all this time? What's happened? But what they do is call us, and they call the district attorney's office. We have a custodial interference problem. The calls are routed directly to me. And the first thing we do is I sit down on the phone. I'm on the phone, of course, in most cases. Sometimes they come in the office. But we go over it. What's the situation? Do you have paperwork? Do you have paperwork? I want to see it. Bring it by. If you don't have paperwork, which most of them don't, then let's talk about it. And of course, essentially what happens with the statute, if you don't have paperwork, there's no court order, and both of you are the parents, obviously, that's a priority, then essentially what you have is joint custody. Okay? No parent has more custody of this child than the other, essentially equal custody, and which is an interesting thing, an interesting revelation to most of these couples. But so we look at it. What's the situation? Where is the child now? Is the child across the town or in another state? And but we deal with it on a case-by-case basis. All of them are different. The thing that we want, of course, is that when people call us, the thing they need to realize is tell us the truth. If there's some problems here, maybe there's a little domestic violence. Maybe there's been some drug use, alcohol use, whatever that's caused some of these problems. Let us know. The fact that there is problems in the home doesn't necessarily mean that the child is in any danger. Okay, and so we want to know that. It's interesting when I get calls. Everybody's a drug user. Everybody's a sexual offender. Everybody's and I realize that most of that isn't true, but it's a very emotional situation, and so there's a lot of charges thrown back and forth. Just give us the truth. Tell us what's going on. And in many cases, particularly if the case goes further, we do investigative backgrounds or investigate the backgrounds of both individuals to see what we've got here. And then we act accordingly based on what information we find. So the first thing, call our office, and that gets the ball rolling.
It gets the ball rolling. I think it's real important, to make the point in this conversation that you guys are not pro-mom or pro-dad.
That's right.
You're pro-both people, and really the interest of the child is the ultimate concern in that.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because I run into, in men's groups and meetings and discussions and things, a lot of men who just almost feel like the court systems, the legal system backs the other, the woman 100%, and that they have no rights, and nobody hears them when they're trying to say things. So you guys don't take sides one way or another. You're just there to try to get the situation straightened out.
That's correct. And again, we have both male and female call us. Women and men. I have talked to the dad's organization here in town, which you're probably aware of.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that we don't have a women's organization. That would be very nice if we could get that, because that's a good support group. The dad's organization is a good support group for fathers. They help them prepare paperwork and do these different things. They take a lot of the load off of us. Though when they reach a situation where they're up against the wall, they can't go any further, then they refer these fathers to us. It's unfortunate that we don't have a women's organization like that in this town, because again, the biggest problem is, as the judges in the domestic court will tell you, people don't have any money. And in order to go to court, you've got to have money, and a lot of it usually. Now, a lot of people try to go pro se, without an attorney. That's a very difficult thing, especially if the other party has an attorney. And so it's not something you want to do. But if you have a women's organization, as you have the dad's organization, that would be a great help in this town. So no, we don't take sides. We do look at it from the point of view that the party we're most interested in is the child. And the child has the right to see both parents, okay, and to develop a relationship with both parents. And that doesn't occur when one parent leaves the city or the state with that child. And so that's what we're looking at, and it doesn't make any difference to us which parent it is.
Right. I guess one of the major problems that complaints I hear from a lot of men is in divorce proceedings is they're paying for their attorney and their spouses also. I'm a granddad, and we had a question just here generally talking about the concern of grandparents towards their grandchildren. And from what I can gather by a lot of television nowadays, especially in inner city lower income situations, a lot of times the grandparents are ending up as the only responsible, loving, caring adult in the child's life, especially in situations of drug or alcohol abuse or whatever. Is there anything out there that's dealing, that you guys look at as far as grandparents are concerned and their rights?
Well, the grandparents, of course, don't have a natural right to custody. A parent has a natural right to custody by the fact that they're just the parent. Grandparents don't have that. But you're right, in Albuquerque as well as I'm sure a lot of other places, the grandparents are ending up being some of the, if not the main provider, close to it as far as the child is concerned. And we do have some situations where when either one or the other group or the other parent can't deal with the situation, the grandparents end up with the child. And in many cases what we have is grandparents raising this child and keeping the one or the other parent away from the child. That's a problem. And again, grandparents don't have a natural right to custody. They have to receive a court order. They have to get a court order to have custody of that child. So
it might be worthwhile for grandparents to get a group together like Dads Against Discrimination and see if they couldn't have some voice also.
Well, I know that they're working out and have been in the I'm aware of it in any case, as far as civilly, some type of rights for grandparents to enjoy or develop a relationship with a child, in particular where there's a problem with that. Right. And though we have had a case or two where we've had to go after the grandparents because they are refusing custody to one or the other of the parents. So it's a problem, and it can be a problem. Then again, in some cases, the grandparents are the best place for the children to be, because both parents are having the kind of problems that make it such that the child shouldn't be with that parent. And that's an unfortunate situation, but at least the child has some place to go.
If you really want to get far out there, one step beyond that is the number of step-parents who have been with the child since they were 2 or 3 years old and been there for 10 or 15 years, and then there's a divorce, and they really are out there a ways.
That's a real problem, and of course these cases, as I mentioned to you earlier, are very complicated. No case is like another.
Sure.
And some of them will just, you'll ask for court paperwork and you'll get 6 volumes of the court paperwork. So they can be very complicated. They're very emotional. And there's been times where you get a phone call and you hold it out here because the parent is just beside themselves. And they're difficult. They're very complicated.
A lot of rage and a lot of anger, a lot of blame. Not too much clarity of thought, is there?
That's one of the big problems. Very little. What we tend to think we do is, as far as the office, is that when we get involved, all of a sudden people are realizing they don't want to deal with a criminal action. And a criminal action such as the statute provides for, I believe it's an 18-month penalty as far as jail time and a $5,000 fine per child. And when they start to look at that, plus the expense of fighting a criminal prosecution, they don't want to deal with that. And that brings a lot of common sense back into the case itself.
It seems that that kind of emotional violence, a little bit of drugs or alcohol mixed in it, some estrangement and blame, and that's the kind of things that really escalate in some terrible situations sometimes, where, people die and there's just this unrepairable kinds of stuff. We, speaking of men here, believe that America is struggling through a rebirth right now. And part of what you're doing, and I think you're being nice enough to come down here on the program, and part of what we're efforting to do is to try and get a look at some of these problems and figure some ways that we can all begin to be a little bit more human and a little bit more grown up in beginning to approach those. I think when you think about it, nobody intends any of that damage. It's just there's such an isolation in it. I don't guess you can save the world, and as I say, you guys are kind of Do you have a phone number or something that they could give a call if they needed information, if one of our viewers did?
We do. They can call the Office of the District Attorney at 841-7100, and they'll direct the call to me, tell them that it's about a custodial interference case, and I'll get the call. If I'm not there, I'll be happy to call back, and we're quite quick in our response.
Get right back with them, huh? I'm wondering here. Is there anything that we haven't covered, or where would, I guess, let me ask you this, where would you see the problem of custodial interference ideally, where would it go in the future? I mean, you guys are in a situation trying to intervene in it and legislate it. I mean, what would be, you think, would be the solution?
Well, I think that we're going to be involved in this for a long time. I mean, it's something that the country as a whole is going towards. We mentioned this national board that is dealing with some of these things. I mean, I think it's going to be around with us for a long time. We're hoping that more publicity about custodial interference, the idea that this is child abuse, the idea that you can't take your child and run. It's the same type of thing. You can't run from your problems. We'll find you. And hopefully that will bring about some type of a change in people's attitude. Again, I think the idea of the whole publicity about child abuse itself is something that more people are aware of than they have been in the past. And this is another aspect of child abuse. Children that go through this will suffer through this for years to come, and especially those that are taken from a parent for years. I mean, we've had cases 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years worth. And had one case where children were taken from a mother. It was 18 years later that she found them. No, I guess it was 15 years later. They were 18 or so at the time. Hard case.
That's pretty long. Well, it's the idea that the child should have a right to know both their mom and their dad and have some sort of a life, and someone there to support them and to think of them. That's I guess when we talk about it, ideally in America, our children are our greatest resource, and they're the future that all of us have. One of the things I learned in being a parent was that if you don't know, you should ask. It
that would help.
Hurt.
That would help.
And the other thing to remember is that you're not alone out here. David, I'd like to thank you a whole bunch for coming down and spending some time with us. This is Speaking of Men. This is Public Access Television from Albuquerque, New Mexico. We'd like to thank you for staying with us, and we'd like to also remind you to stand if you can. You run if you have to, but whatever you do, don't quit. Bye-bye. We just sit here for a minute.